Hi, my name is Megan Walsh, and this is a video about the article that I wrote with Izzy Harmon, Penelope Manning, Brenton Ponza, Shirley Wong, Brody Shaw, Daryl Selwood, Kate Anderson, Dinah Redehoff, and Margaret Wallen. And the title of the article that we're talking about in this video is Including People Who Use Augmentative and Alternative Communication in Qualitative Research. Can you hear us? A little bit about this video. This video is a plain language version of the article that we wrote. And the journal we wrote it for is the International Journal of Qualitative Methods. In the video and this article, we talk about our group, the problem we wanted to solve, how we worked together to develop ways that researchers could involve AAC users in research more, and what researchers can do to involve AAC users in research. Here, Shirley will tell you about why we made this video.
It is important that a research is easy to read and understand, so that it is accessible and useful to everyone, especially to people who have work-based needs.
It is important that any research is easy to read and understand, so that it is accessible and inclusive to everyone, especially to people who have complex communication needs.
So, as part of our introduction, we want to talk about what is AAC. AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. And AAC can be used to help people make their speech understood, like Shirley just used it in the last video. AAC can be used instead of speaking in order to communicate. It can also be used to help people understand what's being said to them or what to expect. There's different terms and words that people use to talk about themselves if they use AAC. One group, our voice members, have decided to call themselves AAC users or people who use AAC. Here's a little introduction to our team. We're a team of researchers and a team of people with cerebral palsy who use AAC. And one of the researchers has cerebral palsy and uses AAC. That's Dr. Daryl Selwood. A little bit about cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy is a disability that lasts for a person's whole life. Many people with cerebral palsy have physical difficulties. That means they have trouble moving their bodies to do things like walk, stand, sit, or use their hands. And about 1 in 3 people who have cerebral palsy use AAC. A little bit about CP Achieve. We're all part of a research center called CP Achieve. It's a research center in Australia, and it's focused on the health, well-being, and participation of people with cerebral palsy who are ages 10 to 30 years old. And CP Achieve firmly believes in that expression, nothing about us without us. So CP Achieve actually has 4 advisory groups to help make the research more inclusive and better. There's an advisory group of young people with cerebral palsy, an advisory group of young adults with cerebral palsy. There's one of parents of people with cerebral palsy. And then there's our group, one group, Our Voice, which is people with cerebral palsy who use AAC. So the problem we all started out with is that we knew AAC users have a right to be involved in research. We knew that research is better when AAC users are involved, but sometimes AAC users are excluded from research. And we want more AAC users to be involved in research. What do we mean when we say be involved in research? AAC users can be research participants, so that's somewhere researchers collect data from. So you might fill out a survey or do an interview or be part of a focus group as a research participant. A research partner is somebody who works with researchers at all the stages of the research. Some things research partners might do include tell the researchers what's important to research in the first place, tell the researchers how to make the research study more inclusive. So this can include things like making sure the AAC users know that they can be in the study and that they'll have the support they need in order to participate. And when it gets to the point of the research findings or the results, research partners can make sure that AAC users can understand the results and that the results are useful and relevant to their lives. So AAC users can be involved in research in both of those ways. We wanted to show you how we work together on a solution to include more AAC users in research. And this is a diagram that shows how we work together. I've added some visuals to help. So first we had the project team experience. So on our team, it was Margaret, myself, Daryl, Kate, and Dinah. And together we have experience in speech pathology, occupational therapy, in medicine about cerebral palsy, and in working with people with lived experience like people with cerebral palsy. And then we also have Daryl, who's a researcher and someone who has cerebral palsy and who uses AAC. So we took our experience and we added it to a review of the literature. That means we looked at all the research other people had already done to see if they had suggestions on how to involve AAC users. Then we combined that knowledge and we interviewed researchers that work with CP Achieve to find out what they needed. So we asked them, what gets in the way of including AAC users in your research? What could we do to help you include AAC users in your research? And they were really helpful. And then we met with the parent advisory group. So that's all made up of parents of people with cerebral palsy. And we asked them how we can include their sons and daughters who use AAC in the research more. We put all of that together, and then we brought it to one group, Our Voice, which is Shirley, Penelope, Brody, and Brenton. And we said, here's the ideas that we've come together with. What do you think? And then through a lot of reflecting and going through ideas about what worked and what didn't, and trying different ideas out, we made something called the Inclusive Research Toolkit. And that's basically a guide for researchers who want to know how to involve AAC users in their research. So that guide is based on this framework. And I'll go through each of the little parts. But basically, the most important thing, or the first thing researchers should work on, is balancing power. And I'll explain that in more detail in a minute. Researchers can balance power by making the research accessible. And in order to make the research accessible, you have to collaborate with AAC users. You have to have the skills and knowledge in working with AAC users, and you have to allow lots of time. And then we had 5 areas of research that we found that it's really important for researchers to know specific things about. And that's recruitment. So that's getting AAC users involved in the research. Ethics, how to make the research fair and safe. Adapting the research methods, so how to make the research accessible so that AAC users can participate. Consent, which is how you can help AAC users tell you whether they want to be involved or not and decide whether they want to be involved. And working with communication supporters. So the first part of that framework is balancing powers. And we think that researchers should always think about this when they work with AAC users. A power imbalance happens when one person, the person in power, has more control in a situation than the other person. With AAC users, sometimes the people in power are parents, researchers, therapists, or communication supporters. Sometimes the people in power are trying to be helpful or trying to protect AAC users, but their actions still take the power or control away from the AAC user. So in the next video, Brenton will give you an example of a power imbalance he experienced.
When I was at primary school, there was a rugby game. One of the aides made the decision for me not to play because she said it was too dangerous for me. I didn't get the chance to decide. I ended up playing in the end because my mum spoke to the principal. I wore a helmet and played.
And next, Brody will give you an example of a power imbalance she experiences.
People who assume what I want without waiting to be asked for a response.
So that's power imbalances. Those are when people take away an AAC user's right to make a decision about what they want to do. Once researchers know that those power imbalances can happen and think about ways to prevent them from happening, the next thing that they can do about power is make the research accessible. Accessibility is about whether something's set up for a person with a disability to be able to do it. For example, a building might have steps at its entrance. That's not accessible to a person in a wheelchair. If the building owners add a ramp to the entrance, they make the entrance accessible. This section is about what researchers should think about when they want to make research accessible to AAC users. There's 3 things they need to think about. The first one is collaboration. Collaboration means working together. So the first thing that researchers should do is work with AAC users and ask them what they need in order to make the research accessible. One of the examples is, you can see there's a little picture on this slide of Shirley, and it's on something that we designed called an access profile. And that has everything on it that Shirley wants researchers to know before she works with them. So it has things like how Shirley communicates, how her communication supporters work with her, how far ahead of time she needs us to send the information. So for example, she might like information to be sent 2 weeks ahead of time to give her plenty of time to review it. And if she needs any help understanding the information, for example, if she needs it to be in easy English. It has all that information on there, and we came up with that together by collaborating. And that's the kind of thing that can happen when you collaborate with AAC users. The next thing researchers need is skills and knowledge about AAC users. So we have a picture here of somebody listening to someone else, and the listener's body language says they're really listening, they're really paying attention. And that relates to what we want people to know, which is something called AAC etiquette. AAC etiquette is the best way to be a conversation partner and a listener to an AAC user. For example, we want people to stop and listen to the AAC user and wait while the AAC user is talking, instead of going off and doing something else while the AAC user is typing their message. Another area of knowledge and skill is knowing how to ask questions so that you don't exhaust the AAC user, or so the AAC user doesn't have to type big, long answers if they don't want to. So in our group, we use this emotional faces scale sometimes to give opinions. This is an easier way for people to give opinions because we can give them the choices of the faces and they can tell us which one corresponds with how they're feeling. And it's really good for those times when people just want to give a quick answer. And then if there are times if you want to give a longer answer, we of course wait. And that brings me to the third part of accessibility, time. We know that using AAC to communicate takes longer than speaking. Researchers need to know to wait and to wait patiently. We also know that preparing for research takes longer for the AAC user and for the research. So for example, it might take longer for the AAC user because they need to pre-program their answers in their communication device before a meeting, or because they need help understanding what the questions mean, so they need to go through the questions ahead of time. And it might take longer for a researcher because they need to take the time to actually make things like agendas or interview questions accessible. It might even mean making a video like this. So researchers need to plan for a lot of time in order to make sure that AAC users can participate and say what they want to say. Now we're at the bottom part of that framework that I showed you earlier. And these are important parts of the research to think about for AAC user involvement. So I'll talk about each one of these 5, and then we'll wrap this video up. Recruitment. Recruitment is finding people to be part of your advisory group as a research partner, or to be part of your study if you're looking for participants. What One Group Our Voice says is that AAC users might think they aren't invited into the research because in the past they've been excluded. AAC users also might think that people will talk down to them or assume they can't participate in the research because they've experienced that before too. So our suggestions are for researchers to make it very clear that AAC users are invited into the research and make it very clear that they've made the research accessible. This photo that has Penny in it is actually from a video advertisement that we made to recruit more people into One Group Our Voice. And in this video, the AAC users are the stars. And we did that to show AAC users that they were welcome into our group. And we also made a video to make it more accessible than something written down, because we know that some AAC users have a hard time with reading. And some AAC users just learn better by listening. Ethics. So all research that involves humans goes through an ethics process. And the ethics process is meant to make sure that research is safe and fair to research participants. This includes making sure that research participants are in control of whether or not they participate and how they participate, and that the power between the researcher and the participant is balanced. What researchers need to know is that some of the people who work on that ethics process don't know a lot about AAC users. So they might make some assumptions, like they might think that AAC users can't make their own decisions about research. Researchers need to make it clear that they can. One thing researchers can do is have AAC users as research partners. That helps because those AAC users can give advice on how to make the research fair, safe, and with balanced power. And then researchers, after developing that plan, can go to the ethics committees and say, this is how we know we've come up with a fair, safe plan that balances power. It's because we made this plan with AAC users. Adapting research methods. So this is about how researchers go about doing their research. They might do an interview or a survey or a focus group or things like that. What we think is once researchers know about balancing power and they know about accessibility, they'll think of lots of ways that they can make their research accessible and adapt their research methods. But some specific suggestions we have are giving the AAC user interview questions ahead of time so that they have time to prepare, offering more than one interview or focus group session so that there's plenty of time for everyone to contribute. So for example, if you would ordinarily do one interview session, for an AAC user, you might want to offer 2 or 3 so that there's plenty of time for them to say what they want to say. And planning to ask some questions that can have short answers so that the AAC user doesn't always have to give a long answer. And that will help prevent fatigue and make sure that the AAC user has the energy when they want to give a long answer. The next part is consent. Consent in research is when a participant says that they want to be involved in research. Traditionally, participants give consent in research by signing a piece of paper that describes the research. Some AAC users have difficulty signing a paper or reading a paper, particularly though signing a paper if you have cerebral palsy and have difficulty using your hands. Some AAC users need help to make decisions about whether they want to be involved in research. So when researchers plan to get consent from AAC users, they need to take these things into account and make that consent accessible. Working with communication supporters. So this is the last part before I wrap up. This is a really important area when we're thinking about research with AAC users. Communication supporters can help AAC users participate in research. In one group, our voice, communication supporters do things like letting us know if an AAC user has something to say, asking the AAC user a question in a way that makes more sense to them, repeating what the AAC user said if we don't hear it. Sometimes communication supporters don't wait long enough, or they might answer for the AAC user. Those are times when they're trying to be helpful or efficient, but it creates a power imbalance. Communication supporters also may not know much about research. They may not have very much experience with research. So what we suggest is researchers work with the AAC user to make sure everyone's roles are clear. So that could be on something like that access profile that we showed you that Shirley completed. And on that, Shirley tells us what she wants her communication supporters to do. For Shirley, she wants her communication supporters to take notes for her so she can remember what's happened in the meeting. And she wants her communication supporters to help her clarify if we haven't understood her speech. So if you make a clear plan at the beginning of the research with the AAC user and with the communication supporter and the researcher, and everyone's on the same page, that will maximize how much the AAC user can participate. So this is our conclusion. That means the end. In conclusion, we think researchers should involve AAC users as research partners so that their research is more inclusive. We also think researchers should involve AAC users as research participants. Then we can know more about what AAC users want and need, because there isn't enough research yet to tell us those things. Researchers should work hard to prevent power imbalances. And one of the ways that researchers can do that is by making the research more accessible. We want this information to help researchers involve AAC users in research more often, and researchers can use our toolkit to make their research more inclusive. And in a minute, I'll put up an email address that you can email if you want a copy of that toolkit. This is just a short slide to say thank you. We got funding or money to run our advisory group and write this journal article and this video through a grant from the State Trustees Australia Foundation. And we're also part of CP Achieve, which is funded by a grant from the National Health and Medical Research Council. We also have people that worked on the toolkit and the article and the video with us. And those are members of the CP Achieve Parent Advisory Group, some other consumer advisors named Joan Gaines and Nick Bradbury, the CP Achieve researchers who participated in the interviews as part of our information gathering, our former OT student, Millicent Cook, who worked a lot on the literature review, and Dr. Amanda Brignell, who gave us feedback on the journal article. So, if you'd like a copy of the toolkit, if you have any questions, or if you need this information delivered in another way, you can email Margaret Wallen at margaret.wallen@acu.edu.au and let her know. Thank you.